everybody! Today I'm going to talk about a phrasing system called Jeff phrasing. The short version is that by using Jeff phrasing, you can save a lot of strokes in your writing. But before we get to the long version, let me back up and explain what is a phrase. A phrase is a type of brief that typically includes 2 or more words. So you're able to output multiple words with just one stroke of the keyboard in steno. This helps save you time with common phrases such as in the or at the. Instead of using a stroke for each word, you can double your efficiency by putting 2 words together. So this may beg the question, why can't we just put as many words as we want on a phrase? And the answer is you could, but it gets difficult with longer and longer phrases because in steno we need to write verbatim. And if the way the speaker says something is 1 word off than this long phrase brief that we have, we can no longer use that brief because we need to write it exactly the way it was said. So I hope it makes sense that when you make phrases, there are usually phrases that are common or words that are always said after each other. Now, when I first started learning steno in the Plover Discord, I heard about Jeff phrasing constantly because it seemed like a great innovation that everyone should be using. And I want to say that yes, it is one of the best free, powerful phrasing systems that we have in the open steno community. But I also want to mention that it is a little overemphasized in my opinion, especially for beginners or people who are still solidifying their theory knowledge. For example, a large number of court reporters who went to school 30 to 40 years ago will tell you that they never learned phrases or even briefs. They made it all the way to 225 words per minute without needing phrases to shorten their writing. So just keep in mind that that is possible and phrases are not a need. But if you do incorporate them in your writing, I'm sure you'll notice your speed increase. Alright, so let's get to Jeff. And it's just called that because the guy who made it is named Jeff. To explain Jeff phrasing at a very basic level, it reserves unconflicting strokes using the initial side of the keyboard. So basically every stroke in the system is going to have a unique left side starter that shouldn't conflict with any other theory rules you have, so that as long as the starter is unique, anything else on the stroke will never conflict. Within Jeff, there's actually 2 systems. There's the simple system and the full system. In the simple system, your starter is a small word, and then you add a pronoun and a verb using your right hand. And in the full system, there are even more components. Your starter is a pronoun. Your left thumb adds future tense. Your right thumb adds manipulations to the verb form. The asterisk is used for negatives. F is reserved for have, for perfect tense. And then you add verbs. And the hallmark feature of the Jeff phrasing system is that verbs automatically convert to create a grammatically correct phrase. So for example, I plus need would be I need, but he plus need would be he needs. For more information, I recommend reading through the GitHub documentation, as well as looking at these nifty charts from steno keyboards. Do you feel overwhelmed yet? Wonder how you're supposed to figure out every key you're supposed to press at the same time just for that one stroke? Don't worry, that's what I thought at first as well. But let me show you how to use this. First, let's install it so we can start practicing. Jeff phrasing comes as a Python dictionary, which is made for Plover. So you can either download the individual file from the GitHub repo, or if you prefer cloning and you know how to do that, go for it. Now, in Plover, you're going to have to install a plugin that enables the use of Python dictionaries. It's called Plover Python Dictionary, and you can find it in the plugin manager. Just install it and you'll be good to go. Next, add the dictionary to your stack by locating the file. And now you should be ready to go. As with all new theory, now it's time to practice so that you know that you can implement it while actually writing. To do this, we're going to use this trainer website by Lynn. For most people, I recommend just playing around with this website and slowly memorizing what you want to using the options. And now a little customization intermission for those of you who can code. If you're programming savvy, I recommend you download or clone the repo and go in to edit the JavaScript file. Down in the comments, I'm going to leave some code that you can add to the preset section in the JavaScript file. This will allow you to load the exercises I designed for you to learn Jeff's phrasing. The other thing you may or may not need to do if you can program is use the collision check script to compare Jeff to your current dictionary to see if there's conflicts. Based on the results, you can go into your Jeff phrasing pie and change some of the mappings to your liking. For example, in my theory, SWR is the letter Z. So I had to change the mapping for the full starter I, or I wouldn't be able to write Z words anymore. I personally switched mine to KPR, but you can go for any combination on your initial side that doesn't conflict. Additionally, Python dictionaries only work with Plover with the plugin. So in case you need a different version, there'll be a link to another script down below, which you can use to convert your Python file to a JSON dictionary. From the JSON format, you can use Plover to convert it to RTF, which is a file format that most cats accept. accept. So if you use CaseCat or Eclipse or Digital Cat or something like that, you should be able to bring in Jeff phrasing as an RTF. And that's the end of the intermission. If you're running default Jeff and it works for you, no problem. In case you've got my preset buttons for practicing in the trainer, you can use those to follow along the next steps, and if you don't, just tick off what you see on the screen. And for the record, I personally haven't learned or used the simple system yet. So far, I only incorporate the full form into my writing daily, so I wanted to tell you about how I learned that. The first thing you're going to need to do is memorize your pronouns. I recommend learning I, you, he, she, we, and they. Once you've got those memorized pretty well, the next thing to do is learn some verbs. And you'll be looking at all these verbs and you're like, which ones do I even need? This is so confusing. And that's why I provided a list of the ones I actually use. And most of these should be pretty easy to remember. The next thing I recommend learning is the U key. Now this is the flip function and it switches the position of the first two words. By default, the second word is an invisible do. So if you take the phrase you know and flip it using you pull out the invisible do and put it in front. You now have do you know. And I really recommend getting used to the do you format because I find that do you phrases are very common in my practice. After that, the next most useful category I would say is the asterisk for don't phrases. So you can now say I don't know, or I don't recall, or I don't remember. From here, it gets a little bit more complicated. I recommend learning the past tense key, which is D or is Z when the verb contains an S. This may be some mental gymnastics at first because it literally converts the phrase into past tense instead of the simple ed function you may associate it with. So for example, I go with past tense is now going to be I went, which for most people is not a way they're used to thinking about steno. So this one may take you some time to get used to. The next thing I would recommend you learn is can and will. And these are very helpful, not only because they help you expand your phrases, but you can also use them in abbreviated form. So you can say we can, she can, he will, they will, just by using part of the system because you don't have to use all the way to the end. You can also combo this with asterisks for like I don't, I can't, I won't. Now I recommend can and will just because they come up all the time. Shall does not come up often, but I would say the reason it's probably in there is that can, will, and shall go together with the past tense D function to make could, would, and should. Now personally, I find this a big mental jump because the D is all the way at the end, even though it's associated with a word that's usually the second in the phrase. So I have not implemented using could, would, and should in Jeff's phrasing yet. It's just a little bit too much mental gymnastics for me to be going fast while writing. But if you can do it, go for it. If you're able to learn up to this point, that's pretty much everything I personally use currently. I would also recommend learning F for have, although it isn't very common, and then adding on a couple more verbs. Also, many of the verbs have an extra word at the end that can be tacked on using T or S. For example, for the phrase I have to, where have is T, then you can tack on the word to just by using S. And now you have unified phrases for I have to, you have to, she has to, he has to, so on. Many theories have want on PT, but in Jeff, want is only on P, so that PT can be reserved for want to. So you can say I want and I want to. So that's all the advice I currently have for learning the system, and I want to encourage you that you can use it in your writing and feel yourself getting faster from it. You just have to know which slices to learn bit by bit so that you can actually use them. It's unrealistic to me to think that you can use the full power of this phrasing system and remember every single thing to output complex phrases. After all, the goal is to be able to recall them quite fast, at least faster than you would take to write out each word. So really ask yourself as you learn Jeff phrasing, what is the cognitive load for me, and am I able to recall these fast enough? Is it something that will get better with practice, or is it something that I should just stick to writing it out? From the theory that was taught at my school, we were given some useful phrases such as I's, use, and do use. But the problem with these is that they're not easily modifiable to create similar phrases with just slightly different words. For one thing, some of them have asterisks and some of them don't to avoid conflicts. And I personally find that that really slows me down to not be able to depend on everything just being the same. Additionally, it does create some conflicts. For example, do you know now requires dune to be asterisked. The reason I like Jeff is because it's consistent all the way across. And while I can type I said and you said with little problem, once it gets to he said, it sounds like heeds So that's a word, and then I have to asterisk again. The reason I like Jeff is that it's completely consistent. Said is always said, and I don't have to reach into my memory to find if something had an asterisk or not to avoid a conflict. I just know that with the unique starters, nothing conflicts. The trade-off, obviously, is that everything's a little bit more abstract. If in steno you're really used to every key you press relating to a certain sound, this could be a conceptual jump for you. But personally, I love shapes, and remembering pronouns as a certain shape on the board is easy for me. And lastly, I have to end off this video by mentioning a couple of shortcomings for this system. It's really quite powerful, but there's a couple things it can't handle. First of all, contractions are on by default, and you can't get the non-contraction versions unless you go in and change the code. And the other one is that while the simple phrases are very convenient and helpful, they're obviously more simple than the full system. So for example, negatives aren't accessible in the simple system. Alright, so that's everything about Jeff phrasing. I hope you get an idea of what it is, how to use it and install it, how to learn it, why you would learn it, why I learned it, and its pros and cons. And even though Jeff phrasing can handle some really long, complicated phrases, remember that a phrase is only really worth it if you can input it quickly. Overall, I hope you save some strokes with Jeff phrasing, but remember that less strokes for the sake of less strokes is not always the right answer. Alright, and time for my week recap. Overall, it was a pretty uneventful week. I just had my practice requirements to fulfill and a few small assignments for my other class. These days, with required practice, it's really been a slog because I don't get to work on things that I feel like would make me better. By the time I finish the required practice, I'm totally out of energy, and I can't find the motivation to do even more than the 4 or 5 hours I'm doing each day. Overall, being in Theory 3 right now, I feel like it's really plateaued out. It's really not as hard as it was in Theory 1. We aren't given as much to memorize, and we don't have as many concepts to learn either. This week was a review week, which means we just repeated the same exercises as last week. Speed-wise, I'm finally at a level where I'm challenging a speed I can't seem to pass right now. Currently, I'm doing the literary edit test at 140 and the literary real-time test at 120, and although I've passed Q&A 120 once, I'm repeating it just to get a little bit more comfortable. Currently, I don't really see the way forward on how I'm supposed to get faster right now, but I know my school is not really interested in teaching me that until I finish theory and get into speed building next January. When I do tests, I tend to write a section well and then drop a chunk. And right now, my tests are basically, did I drop a handful of chunks or a bunch of chunks? The vocabulary is also typically harder than the ones we're practicing in theory right now, which is crazy since we're supposed to be done with theory soon. And there are some areas that I would need some targeted practice for, such as addresses, that we just don't do right now. As for my other class, which is basically more complicated functions of my transcription software, we've been learning something called quick keys, which is basically a shortcut mode that you switch into, and you're supposed to use it to edit your transcript using only your keyboard so that you don't have to go back and forth to your mouse. It sounds nice, but I think it requires a lot of customization, which I did go in and do some customization this week. And more excitingly, I hooked up some of the shortcuts to my Stream Deck, and I find it even faster to use the Stream Deck than my keyboard. So I'm excited to show that system to you guys sometime in a video once I get my shortcuts more solidified. Alright, that's it. See you guys next week.